Mama Esi, I am not ready to have this baby. I am too young. Having a baby now would disrupt my life. I am heartbroken, Mama Esi. Is there any way you can help me? Mama Esi looked at Adoro with compassion, but with all seriousness in her eyes. My love, it's too late to get rid of the baby safely. It will be very dangerous for you at this stage to tamper with the pregnancy. Adoma's heart sank. She did not know what to do, but then Mama Esi said something that surprised her. If you don't want the baby, you can sell it after it's born. I know of people who would pay a lot of money for a healthy child. Once upon a time, in a village far away, there lived a girl named Adoma. Adoma was a very beautiful and vibrant young girl with a kind heart that made everyone love her. She was always helpful and sweet, making people smile wherever she went. Adoma's father was a poor fisherman. He worked hard every day by the river, trying to catch as many fish as he could to sustain the family. Adoma's mother was a tailor. She sewed clothes for people in the village, doing her best to make sure they had all they needed. Even though they didn't have much, Adoma's family was happy. They loved each other very much. Adoma had a few close friends. Together, they walked to the stream every day to fetch water. Adoma was very smart. She always listens to her parents and the elders in the village. Because of this, she was always regarded as one of the few good girls in the village. She was once in a while given presents by the elders and youths of the village. Adoma lived in the village of Oduro. Oduro village was a village where dreams of prosperity and happiness were nurtured but rarely realized. Life in the village was simple but challenging, with many struggling to make ends meet. Adoma's parents, though hardworking, often reminded her of the importance of self-reliance and finding a stable trade. Adoma felt very proud and happy because she knew she was also making her parents happy as well. The villagers all knew and loved Adoma. They would say, "Adoma is a good girl. She's going to do great things one day." And Adoma would smile, dreaming of the day she would live a life of luxury, freedom, and get an escape from the boring and poor life of the village. As Adoma grew older, her parents enrolled her in Auntie Mary's salon to learn hairdressing. Auntie Mary had one of the biggest hairdressing salons in Oduro. Adoma had a friend named Efwa. She was an apprentice at the salon where Adoma enrolled. Efwa was not as smart as Adoma, and she wasn't as pretty either, but she had a way of doing things differently, which sometimes were not very good. The other girls in the village noticed this. They would always say to Adoma, "Adoma, be careful of Efwa. She is not really a good girl." But Adoro didn't listen because she liked Efwa and wanted to be her friend. One day, Adoma went to her place of work without any food because her parents could not afford to give her any food or cash to buy one. She felt very hungry and sad, but when she arrived at the salon, she saw Efwa carrying 2 plates of food. Efwa smiled and said, "Adoma, I brought this plate of food for you. I made it specially for you." Adoma was surprised and very thankful. "Thank you so much, Efwa," she said, and they both sat down to eat together. From that day, their friendship grew stronger. Adoma was grateful and happy to have a friend like Efwa, who is always there for her when she needed it. Even though Efwa was not the best influence, Adoma continued to do well in her choice of skill learning, making a success out of it. Adoma believed that as long as she stayed true to herself, she would make a headway in her choice of skill learning, and everything would be okay. After Adoma and Efwa finished their training in hairdressing, they began to spend lots of time together. They would walk through the village, visit the markets, and talk about everything. Adoma noticed that Efwa had nice clothes, pretty jewelry, and other things that Adoma couldn't afford. This made Adoma very curious. How does she get all these things? Adoma asked herself, thinking out aloud. Out of curiosity, Adoma decided to ask Efwa, Efwa, how do you get all these things? Where does the cash come from? Efwa smiled and said, it's from a man named Kwabena. He gives me lots of money and buys me lots of gifts. Adoma didn't understand. But why would he do that? What do you do for him? Efwa looked around to make sure no one was listening, and then she quietly whispered into Adoma's ears, he is my male friend. I make him always happy, and so he gives me lots of money. It's easy, and I get whatever I want. Adoma was very shocked. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. What if you get pregnant, Efwa? Are you not scared? Efwa shook her head and smiled. Don't worry, Adoma. I know how to take care of myself. I won't get pregnant now. It's nothing to be afraid of. Adoma felt confused and worried. It has never crossed her mind to do something like that, but the way Efwa said it, she made it appear very simple, very easy. Adoma did not know what to think, but she trusted her friend as she looks so confident. Adoma, wanting to keep being friends with Efwa, did not say a word and continued to follow Efwa as a friend, although deep inside, she felt something wasn't right. One bright evening, as Adoma was on her way to Efwa's house, she met a man named Kwesi. Kwesi was young and very handsome and was well known all over the village. Kwesi was a trader who owned a big provision store. Kwesi was a very kind and hardworking man. Adoma and Kwesi became friends. Although every night when Adoma is going to Efwa's house, she would see Kwesi sitting in front of his store. Kwesi, each time he sees Adoma walking by, would call her to greet her. Gradually, they became friends and they began to talk more frequently. Kwesi liked Adoma's gentle nature and her beauty. One day, as Adoma walked by, Kwesi once again beckoned on her as usual. As they stood talking, Kwesi looked deeply into Adoma's eyes and smiled. Before they parted ways, Kwesi put hand into his pocket and pulled out a small tiny tote bag. Inside was a very beautiful necklace. He handed it to Adoma and said, "This is for you, Adoma. I hope it makes you happy and brings a smile to your face." Adoma was surprised but happy. They are really beautiful and it looks expensive. Her face gleaming with gratitude. From that day onwards, Adoma became a very close friend to Kwesi. They would laugh and talk about everything that took place in the village. Sometimes Adoma would sit with him in his provision store. Kwesi made Adoma to feel very special, and that made her to always look forward to seeing Kwesi. One day, as the night went along, Adoma and Kwesi ended up having fun. This was strange to Adoma as she had never done that before. Adoma liked Kwesi very much, but she felt strange about what they had done. As all this was going on, Adoma's parents were busy planning the best for her. They were trying all they could to see how they could gather money to give their daughter to buy needed tools to open up her own salon. Things were very difficult for them. To ensure Adoma gets all the money needed to start her own business, they sent her to a nearby village called Kuki. Kuki was known for its busy bustling life, and markets, so they thought it would be a very good place for Adoma to grow. A few weeks after she had been with Kwesi, she came to the realization of something that made her heart sink. She was pregnant. Nervously, she went to Kwesi and told him the news, hoping he would stand by her. But instead, Kwesi placed his hand on her shoulder, shook his head and said, "No, Adoma, I'm not responsible for it. The pregnancy is not mine." His words were unfriendly, and with that, he turned and walked away from her. Adoma felt betrayed and alone. The man she thought cared and loved her had just rejected her in her time of need. Now that she's expecting a baby, she did not know what to do. After being rejected by Kwesi, Adoma felt lost and scared. Her parents, who were not aware of the predicament their daughter was in, sent her to Kuki to work. Kuki was a busy village known for having lots of work opportunities, where anyone searching for a job could make a living. As Adoma left her parents' house, she was filled with a mixture of emotions. She was excited about working and making money, but she was very scared about what would happen to her pregnancy. When she arrived at Kuki, she stayed with a relative who stayed near the busy village center. Her aunt was a very kind woman. She welcomed Adoma home, but Adoma couldn't stop thinking about the baby inside her. She didn't want to have the baby. How would she take care of it, a little one, all alone, she thought. Overwhelmed by shame and fear of judgment from her aunt and the villagers, she decided to visit a midwife in the village called Mama Esi. This midwife is the one people in the village go to when they needed help with their pregnancies. Adoma sought her wisdom and discretion. Mama Esi, while compassionate, was realistic. She informed Adoma that it was too late to terminate the pregnancy safely. However, she suggested an unconventional option: selling the baby after birth. Mama Esi spoke of wealthy families from far-off towns, desperate for children and willing to pay handsomely. The suggestion horrified Adoma at first, but as the days passed, the fear of poverty and shame began to overweigh her moral hesitation. As months passed and Adoma's resolve hardened, she abandoned thoughts of working to gather some cash or returning to the simple life of her parents. Instead, she focused solely on the promise of wealth. When the time came, Adoma gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. After giving birth, she felt no maternal connection to the baby. Without hesitation, she handed the child to Mama Esi. In return, Mama Esi gave a small fortune in gold coins and jewelry. Adoma, clutching her newfound wealth, left Kuki for Asanteko, where she briefly enjoyed the luxury her money afforded her. Adoma's journey into a life of wealth through childbearing and selling began with hesitation, but over time it became a pattern she followed without remorse. Each time she found herself pregnant, the memory of Mama Esi's advice echoed in her mind. "Adoma, you are young and beautiful. You don't have the means to care for a child now. Let those who are desperate and wealthy take them in exchange for a life you deserve. That is a gift for both sides." At first, Adoma convinced herself that she was doing the right thing. She told herself that the families buying her children could provide a better life than she ever could. But deep down, she knew that the real motivator was the promise of gold and jewels. After selling her first child, Adoma left Kuki for Asanteko, where she indulged in fine clothes, food, and luxuries. However, her newfound wealth quickly dwindled. She returned to Kuki and met Kofi, a charming farmer who admired her beauty. When Adoma discovered she was pregnant again, she did not tell Kofi. Instead, she went straight to Mama Esi, who reassured her. "Another child, Adoma. You are truly blessed. This will bring you even greater fortune." Mama Esi arranged for another buyer, a wealthy trader from the city who had lost hope of ever having children. When the baby, a boy, was born, Adoma handed him over without hesitation, accepting another bag of gold coins and jewelry in return. Adoma's reputation as a wealthy woman grew, and with it came mosquitoes. She soon became pregnant again, this time by a merchant named Kwame, who left her as soon as he learned of her condition. Adoma didn't mind. By now, she had grown accustomed to the cycle: pregnancy, childbirth, and sale. Her third child, a girl, was sold to a noble family from the capital. And her fourth child, another boy, went to a widowed woman who longed for a child to fill her empty home. Each transaction brought Adoma more wealth, but it also deepened her detachment from the children she bore. Mama Esi continued to play an important role in Adoma's life, acting as both an advisor and a broker. The elderly woman would comfort Adoma during her pregnancies and arrange for buyers who were willing to pay handsomely. "You are doing the right thing, Adoma," Mama Esi would say. "These children will grow up in homes of plenty, and you will have the means to live the life you deserve." By the time Adoma gave birth to her fifth child, her heart had hardened completely. She no longer thought of her children as human beings but as commodities. Mama Esi noticed the change in her and praised her for her strength. "You have learned to focus on what matters, Adoma. The world is harsh, and you must take care of yourself first." Adoma's fifth child was sold to a wealthy landowner, while her sixth and seventh children went to childless couples in distant towns. Each transaction brought her greater riches, but the villagers began to grow suspicious of her. They whispered about her frequent pregnancies and her sudden wealth, but no one dared confront her directly. Adoma's eighth pregnancy came after a brief affair with a traveling musician. By now, she had become skilled at hiding her condition from the villagers, only appearing in public once the child was sold. The ninth child was born under more difficult circumstances. Adoma fell ill during the pregnancy, and for a brief moment, she considered keeping the child. But Mama Esi quickly dismissed the idea. "Do not let weakness cloud your judgment, Adoma. You are strong because you make the hard choices. Remember, there are families out there who need the child more than you do." Mama Esi's words renewed Adoma's resolve, and the ninth child was sold to a government official who had been waiting for years to adopt. By the time Adoma became pregnant with her 10th child, she was known throughout Kuki as a mysterious woman of immense wealth. Her fine clothes and jewelry set her apart from the villagers, but her lack of a husband and children made her an object of both admiration and suspicion. The 10th child was a girl, born on a stormy night. As Adoma held the baby in her hands, she felt a flicker of emotion she hadn't experienced in years. For a moment, she considered keeping the child, but Mama Esi quickly intervened. "Adoma, you have come too far to turn back now. This child will bring you more fortune than all the others combined. Think of the life you have built. Don't let sentiments ruin it." Reluctantly, Adoma handed the baby to Mama Esi, who had already arranged for a buyer. The family, a pair of wealthy merchants, paid a fortune for the child, and Adoma's riches reached new heights. Adoma's wealth had reached heights that few in Kuki could comprehend. Her fine silks and gold ornaments became symbols of success to some and of suspicion to others. Yet her heart grew colder with each passing year. and the whispers of the villagers grew louder. Her parents, though still living in the village of Oduro, distanced themselves from her, unable to understand the source of her riches. It was during a market day that the first public confrontation happened. Kwesi, the father of her first child, who left Oduro few years after Adoma left, was in Koki to buy goods. When he saw Adoma, draped in gold and standing confidently among the villagers, his curiosity turned to anger as he had heard rumors of what Adoma was doing with the children she gave birth to. "You disappeared when you were pregnant, Adoma," Kwesi said loudly, drawing the attention of the crowd. "What happened to the child we were supposed to have?" Adoma's heart raced, but she maintained her composure. "This is none of your concern, Kwesi," she replied sharply. But the villagers, now emboldened by Kwesi's accusation, began to question her as well. Where had all the children gone? Why did she never speak of them? Adoma deflected their questions, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Over the months, rumors about Adoma's children spread through Oduro and Koki. Some said she had abandoned them. Others suspected something darker. Her wealth, once admired, now became a symbol of her mysterious and troubling past. Even the men who had once courted her began to question whether they too had unknowingly fathered children who had disappeared. Kwame, the merchant who had once been infatuated with her, confronted her in the middle of the village square. "Adoma, I deserve to know. Did you sell our child?" he demanded. Adoma, caught off guard, denied it. "You are speaking nonsense, Kwame. I have no idea of what you are talking about." But the denial only fueled the villagers' suspicions. After a while, Adoma returned back to Oduro to relieve herself of the constant confrontation and accusation. Adoma's parents, who had long suspected something was amiss, finally comforted her in private. Her father, Kwaku, spoke first. "Adoma, the villagers are saying terrible things about you. They say you have sold your own children. Tell us, is it true?" For the first time in years, Adoma felt a pang of guilt. She avoided their gaze, but her silence was enough to confirm their worst fear. Her mother, Abena, broke down in tears. "We raised you better than this," Abena sobbed. "How could you trade the lives of your children for gold?" Adoma tried to justify her actions. "I did it for survival, Mama. For a better life. Those families gave them a future I couldn't provide." But her parents were inconsolable. Her father, shaking his head in disappointment, said, "We may be poor, Adoma, but we would never trade our family for wealth. You have brought shame upon us." The strain of the relationship proved too much for Abena. She fell ill, her health deteriorating rapidly. Adoma, consumed by guilt, tried to take care of her, but her mother refused her help. "I cannot bear to look at you, Adoma," Abena whispered on her deathbed. "You have lost your way." When Abena passed, Adoma was left to face the wrath of her father, who blamed her entirely. "You killed her with your greed," Kwaku spat. "You are no child of mine." Desperate and alone, Adoma turned to Mama Ese, the woman who had guided her down this path. But when she arrived at Mama Ese's house, she found the elderly woman cold and distant. "You knew this would happen," Adoma accused Mama Ese. "You told me I was doing the right thing." Mama Ese shrugged. "I gave you choices, Adoma. You made them. Do not blame me for the consequences of your actions." Adoma realized that Mama Ese, who had once seemed like a wise and supportive figure, had only been interested in her own profits. Furious and betrayed, Adoma left Mama Ese's home, vowing never to return. Determined to atone for her mistakes, Adoma decided to track down the families who had purchased her children. She hoped to reconnect with them, to explain her actions, and perhaps even bring some of them back. But the journey proved fruitless. Many families denied knowing anything about her, while others outright refused to let her near the children. "They are ours now," one woman said firmly. "You have no rights to them." Each rejection deepened Adoma's despair. The children she had sold were no longer hers, and the wealth she had gained from their loss now felt meaningless. When Adoma returned to Oduro, she found herself ostracized. The villagers shunned her, and her father refused to speak to her. She sold her remaining possessions and used the money to help the poor. But even this act of charity was met with suspicion. "She's only doing this to ease her guilt," the villagers whispered. Adoma retreated to a small house at the edge of the village, where she lived in solitude. Her once vibrant spirit was now broken, and her days were filled with quiet reflection. She often thought of her children, wondering if they were happy, if they even knew they had been sold. As Adoma sat alone in her home, she realized that the wealth she had sought so desperately had brought her nothing but pain. She had traded the love of her family and the trust of her community for gold that could not fill the void in her heart. Adoma's life at the edge of Oduro was marked by isolation and haunting memories. Each night she dreamt of her children, their cries, their tiny hands, and the faces she barely allowed herself to look at before giving them away. Her once proud spirit was now consumed by guilt and regret. But the villagers' anger towards her did not subside. Rumors about her dealings with Mama Esi continued to circulate, and the men who had fathered her children became more vocal in their outrage. Kwesi, Kwame, and others began to gather in secrets, discussing ways to force Adoma to admit the full extent of her actions. One fateful day, the men confronted Adoma in front of the entire village. They dragged her to the market square, where a crowd quickly gathered.